Hi, everyone. My name is Usha. I'm joined here with Jared. I am an executive coach and consultant, and I'm really passionate about helping leaders lead high performing, human centric organizations. Jared, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm excited to be joined here with you, Usha. My name is Jared Taylor. I'm the founder of Bolder Minds, a leadership development consultancy, and looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Awesome. I'm really excited to explore this topic today. We're going to be exploring this topic today around decision making within uncertainty. And we'll be taking this frame of like organizations and leaders within organizations. But I think some of the insights can be extrapolated to far more than that. And I guess the starting premise I will begin with is I think in the past, the way leaders made decisions and the way we need leaders to make decisions in our current world is completely different. And I'm not sure we've fully caught up to that. And part of that is that the levels of uncertainty we are currently working with, the amount of information that we process day in and day out is completely different. I think there's some statistic that like your grandmother or your grandparents consumed as much in their whole lifetime, as much information as we now consume in a year or something like that. I'm definitely messing up the numbers, but I think the sentiment here is that we're inundated with a lot more information. We're dealing with a lot more moving variables, and things are fundamentally unpredictable and uncertain. So it's not possible to know the right answers and the right solutions from the get-go, and things don't always go from start to finish in the way that we expect them to. And I think we're still, however, dealing with and making decisions as though that is the case. But we're in a fundamentally new landscape and we need a different approach to decision making. So that's sort of the core premise of our conversation. And what is this new kind of decision making ability that we want to unlock for leaders? Jared, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think this conversation is so important and interesting to people like you and I think should be interesting to people who just work in the business space in general, because, especially if you're a leader, one of your core jobs is to make decisions and or help your teams make decisions, right? Like that's how we take action. That's how we move forward. That's how we make an impact in the world and with the businesses that we're operating. And so getting really clear on how we actually are supposed to move forward and make decisions in this incredibly uncertain time is just so fundamental. It's fundamental to business. It's fundamental to leadership, and it's just so important.
Jared, I'd love to hear from you a little bit around how some of the insights around adult development can help frame the differences in how we need to make decisions and some of the capabilities and sort of real leadership maturity that we need to be operating in this current.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about the topic of adult development. It's how you and I, Usha, first were introduced and connected, our mutual love of this field. Very briefly, adult development is this field that was kind of born out of childhood and adolescent development, kind of looking at our stages of consciousness, like how we make meaning of ourselves and in the world. In brief, as adults, there are generally three tiers, three stages that we are at and or can grow into. The first is called the socialized mind, which essentially means that we make sense of ourselves by looking outside at our immediate surroundings, primarily the culture that we're steeped in, right? So the things that are held as important and that are valued in our immediate surroundings, that could be a workplace, could be family, are the same things that we value, and there's almost a blurring between the two. From there, the next stage is called the self-authoring mind, where instead of looking outside, we're really looking more internally to make sense of ourselves in the world. And that's where we kind of self-author or write or create our own value set. And so there's a little bit of more of a distinction in this place where we're able to really see a bit more of the nuance and complexity in the world, recognizing that, I might have my way of making sense of myself and the values that I espouse and believe in, and other people do as well. Right. So there's a bit more of just seeing how both separate and connected we all are as humans. And then the third is called the self-transforming mind. And this is where our sense of self is loosened and our beliefs are not necessarily as firmly rooted as they were previously. And we are able to see and feel and understand the nuances, the complexity of the world. We're able to embrace contradiction and paradox, right? And create bridges across differences. And when you think about these three ways of essentially seeing the world and making sense of the world and the state we're in now, I believe, and a lot of people in this space believe, that we need leaders to be at or close to that self-transforming space, right? To unite us instead of dividing us, to be able to see just how uncertain, complex, ambiguous the world is, and to help connect those dots, right? So we can make decisions and ultimately move forward. And that's just, I think there's almost nothing more important than helping people move into this place right now. Would you add anything to that, Usha?
Yeah, I think, like what stands out to me from like the lens of decision making as you look at these kind of three stages of development is, with the socialized mind, you're kind of absorbing the same assumptions about the world as, the kind of social context that you're in. And when you move into self-authoring, I think the great sort of unlock that you have in that is you're now able to hold those assumptions with some space and with a little bit of looseness, and you're able to actually, I think, take in more and really drive things forward from a place of volition and self-interest. And you kind of have this ability to ask questions about like what is going to be the most strategic move, to move me forward, etc. And I think when you move into the limitation of that, I think is there's still this lens of self-interest. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, but it seems like you're still kind of thinking about it from this place of like authoring yourself and kind of moving yourself. And I think when you move into self-transforming, you're able to move even past that and actually absorb and understand the context of the full system and understand and sit with the paradoxes that are within the full system. And you're able to then make decisions from the place of actually like win-win solutions, what serves the entire system, etc. And one of the things that I've been really sitting with as we look at those stages is this whole recent issue with the tariffs in the United States. And I feel like some of the behaviors are really coming from a leadership maturity perspective. I think some of the decisions have been made very much from like that self-authoring perspective, and possibly like a more shadow self-authoring perspective of like wanting to assert dominance and wanting to make a statement, etc., rather than and really creating like win-lose scenarios rather than actually understanding how interconnected the system actually is and what's required to thrive in this interconnected context, and the decisions that serve the entire system and not just the system you're authoring, if you will. Does that resonate? Are there any holes to be poked in some of that logic there?
No, that's spot on. I would add to that you bring up an important point, which is that each of these ways of making sense of ourselves in the world, these different stages, they're not good or bad. They have shadow sides, they have light sides, right? And what's most important is the match between the environment and the world we're living in and the capability, the developmental capability of us as a society, but I think most importantly, the people in positions of authority and power and leadership. That is what is fundamentally most important. Yeah, in terms of you asked earlier about the kind of the shadow side of the self-authoring mind. Broadly speaking, yes, there is a tendency for people in this place to think that their way of making sense of the world, that their value set is better than the rest. That's not necessarily true, right? Like there is an incredible amount of nuance to this entire framework, to this theory, right? And so we're painting a very, for the sake of time, generalized picture, but just understand it's much more nuanced than we're saying. One a good example of that is, these stages of consciousness are kind of presented as almost like plateaus or steps on a ladder. Two things I'll say about that. One, we probably spend most of our lives actually between the stages. In fact, statistically, most of us are probably at or between socialized and self-authoring. Somewhere in there is where a vast majority of people, at least in Western countries, are. The second is that just because you've reached this developmental level doesn't mean you are there all the time. There's this thing called fallback where we can kind of slide back into different developmental places based on, it could be context, could be around family, It could also be if we are particularly stressed or overwhelmed or triggered, right? If we're just kind of in a fight or flight kind of agitated state, sometimes we kind of regress. I mean, how many times have you, just had a cranky day, right? Maybe you didn't sleep well and you find yourself just being a little bit less mature that day. I've had days like
Yeah,
that myself. So it's not as
definitely.
clear cut as we're making it out to be.
Yeah, and I think, but the thing that stands out to me in that also is, I think with the self-transforming mind, if we like dive deeper into that for a minute, there's all of these capabilities and sort of maturities of like sitting with paradox, the ability to stay with ambiguity, the ability to test and learn quickly and adapt quickly, and fundamentally kind of have this approach of working with the uncertainty and working with the complexity of like multiple players. And I think it's less of like define a solution, plan it out and execute, and more of test and learn, feel your way forward, have a really close pulse on the ground, etc. And it's just a different way of seeing the world, I think, and moving through the world. And if I think about how we've set up designed organizations and how we incentivize leaders and how we select leaders and reward leaders, we're very much looking for them to be certain to have the right solutions and right answers and implement the right things and make it all land and go really smoothly. But actually, to navigate this uncertainty in an actual thoughtful, adaptive way, we need to make it okay for people to not know all the right answers, to change their mind, to
Mm-hmm.
test and learn, and to learn quickly and to fail along the way. And I think some of those things we need to really start looking at, which is if you want to make good decisions in an uncertain context, you have to get really comfortable failing and not having all the information and finding out the hard way what the right information is. All of these little things that I think we just haven't, as a culture, we haven't, there's almost this notion or sense of like it's stupid that I didn't know that before. And I even find that for myself. I recently just moved back to New York and ended up buying a bus ticket instead of a train ticket when I was there. And truly it was just a situation of not having the information. But I just walked away from it feeling like that's so stupid. I should have known that. I should have known better. And I think some of those attitudes are really wired into us, that you need to get the right answer. I need to get the right answer on the first go and quickly. But we're actually asking for very different capabilities. Because I think what we do see is a lot of leaders who do move through these kind of uncertain scenarios with a lot of certainty. But to me, that's pseudo certainty. It's not actual, you don't actually know what the right thing is, but you're incentivized to create clarity and comfort for people. So you stand in that. But I think what you risk when you go too far in pseudo certainty is you stop listening to the cues. And when you stand in a place of, I know the right answer, you just go into confirmation bias, I think.
Yeah, Usha, you bring up such a good point. I love that phrase, first of all, pseudo certainty. I feel like that belongs on a hat. Like I'm pseudo certain. Yeah, like culturally, we're like, we expect our leaders to have the vision, to have the clarity, to have the certainty, right? Like to someone to look up to aspire to, potentially become. And I think that view of leadership we need to rethink that view of leadership. I agree with all the points you made. Leaders need to, I think the job of leaders in this, like, call it this next phase of history where in and is being written as we speak. Like, we need leaders who don't really look like leaders we have today. And by that, I mean, they are comfortable in these incredibly complex, uncertain environments. And if you just look at some of the research around leaders who are in that self-transforming place, they tend to be really confusing to people on their teams, right? Because they don't come across as definitive, as certain. It may take them time to really mull over ideas and think about a path forward. They tend to question a lot. This type of leader we're seeing we need, and the few of them that are out there, are not necessarily seen as the leaders that we are historically used to. The second thing I'll add to that is these leaders and people who are in leadership positions, I think their job is shifting from certainty and having all the answers to enabling their teams to help come up with those answers, and to also develop their teams to have some of these capabilities we're talking about. So it's a vastly different way of looking at leadership, from like kind of being the, to use the metaphor of like the captain on the ship, right? To kind of I can't think of a better metaphor, right? It's like going from that, like the clear, decisive captain of the ship to someone who's maybe like goes down to the deck and is like mulling about and like having different conversations, and like then they'll go back up to the, the what's it called, where the wheel is,
I
wherever the
am
captain
so
of the ship's. Yeah, I shouldn't have picked a boat metaphor.
captain's cabin.
The
I
captain's
don't know.
seat, the captain's seat. Like they'll oscillate between the captain's seat and the deck, and like they'll mull about and like really think about, okay, well, I kind of know where we're going, but what's the right path to get there? And it might take a little bit of time.
Yeah, totally. It's this whole notion of hero leadership, right? We have these
Mm-hmm.
inspiring, charismatic leaders who have all the answers, and the rest of the team is just kind of like there to do things and enact and execute their vision, etc. But that's just not practical in the world that we're living in. And we actually, in holacracy, there's this whole notion of like every single person in the organization is a sensor to the system as a whole. Like there's information that they're constantly processing that's valuable and important to the operating of the whole system. I think good leaders in this context have the ability to actually harness that by asking the right questions, by being curious, and by actually really and the system in this scenario isn't actually just the organization either. It's the customers as well, right? We know this, that the companies that actually speak with their customers and engage and interact with their customers on a regular basis have the best products. They're able to actually deliver the thing that people need, which is a pretty big and important thing to thrive in our current world. And so there is just this, I think it's almost like the locus shifts from this like one kind of savior hero, you have to know all the things and make the right decision, to we all are responsible for sensing and feeding information across this like network of an organization and ensuring that we're asking the right questions to get a sense real time of where things are moving, how things are shifting. And leaders are then making decisions from that place of being informed, having as much knowledge and information as possible, knowing that that's going to change on a day-to-day basis. And it's just this constant feel your way forward and test and learn and iterate in a consistent way. And I think it's interesting because I think we put a lot of stock in like charisma for leaders. It's please go up on stage, inspire us, and leave us feeling all jazzed. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for that. There definitely is. And that's a meaningful skill to have. But there's also now this other piece of leaders who leave people feeling heard and seen and understood, and actually feel people in the organization feel like they're actually contributing to the strategy, to the bigger picture, to steering the ship overall. And they're not just a pair of hands in the organization. And again, this is in a knowledge economy. I think that's a huge shift. We're moving from factories to knowledge economies. And I think we're still catching up in that kind of mindset of looking at what's the responsibility of the people in an organization, and what's the responsibility of a leader, and the partnership that I think really needs to exist there. So Jared, I'd love to hear from you some insights on really practical, actionable steps for leaders who do want to move more into this self-transforming space. What are some things they can do?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start at a high level and then get a little bit more granular. When you look at this trajectory of development we're talking about, moving through these stages, the through line between them is that we're able to take a further steps back, and essentially expand our perspective, be able to take in more, see more, hold more.
Mm.
One metaphor I really like to describe this is it's like leaving the dance floor if you're at a club or something, and getting up on the balcony and actually seeing with a bit more perspective like what's going on down on the action of the dance floor. And a couple of ways we can do that. The first, it's both simple and incredibly hard, is to see more clearly and then question our assumptions. And our assumptions are those kind of underlying ideas and beliefs that really drive our worldview and way of making sense of ourselves, the people around us, and really like the world in general. An example of that might be, well, like, this is a very simple and personal one, but like, I assume that I need to have a steady corporate job in order for me to be successful in life, right? That's a very kind of simple one that we may not walk around saying that, but when you kind of probe deeply on somebody who's, say, struggling in the corporate world, as I was a couple of years ago, you might get to an assumption like that. So first, to be able to just uncover them, which is some work in and of itself, and then be able to question them and ultimately over time rewrite them to kind of make more sense and more meaning for you. A key skill that is incredibly helpful in this process is, or a set of skills I'd say, is emotional intelligence, starting with self-awareness, right? Being able to really understand ourselves more deeply and just get more, ultimately, I see self-awareness and the trajectory of this work, particularly when you look at emotional intelligence around it, is it's just getting really, really curious about our internal experience, right? So difficult conversations, conflict are a great way to do this, and just asking yourself, well, why, when that person said that thing in that meeting, why did I react that way? What was it about what was said, what was done that caused this feeling inside me internally, right? What assumption may have been driving, this experience, my emotional experience? So curiosity, getting really curious, which helps kind of, again, taking that step back and help develop that curiosity. And then finally, this harkens back to what you were saying earlier, Usha, which was, I see humility as an incredibly important skill in all of this work, which my off the cuff definition of humility in this moment is just like taking yourself a little bit less seriously.
Yeah.
And recognizing that like your sense making of a situation may not be the ultimate capital T truth, right? The world is so nuanced. There's so much complexity. There's so much, so everything's a shade of gray. Literally nothing is black and white. Our minds like to make sense of the world in that way, and we like to think in terms of black and white, but that's just not reality. And so having a healthy dose of humility, I think, helps along the way. What would you add to that in terms of like looking at the team side of things?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say is I think, and I say this with a lot of love for leaders, which is the higher up you go on, in the kind of hierarchy of the organization, the less people are willing to be truthful with you. And that is unfortunately just a result of the power dynamics in play. And the more you have to work to create the psychological safety for people to take risks and say something. So I think, and I'm not saying this is the leader's fault. I think this is just a system design, and different leaders will play that to different degrees. I know of leaders who go out of their way to say, I want you to be truthful. I'm looking for your perspective. Please share feedback, etc. And then the leaders who just kind of assume that no one said anything, so it must be all okay and I'm right and let's move forward in this way, etc. So I think just being really mindful of that and being really mindful of the psychological safety that you foster in a really intentional way, I think is really, really crucial. And really making habits of asking for people's objections, asking people, is it safe to try? What else do we need to consider as part of this? And inviting in those perspectives proactively and making that a habit when you're making decisions, I think can go a really long way. And the last thing I'll say is, and this is, I think, both for individuals and teams, is to actually ritualize that act of stepping back, zooming out, and looking at the whole. A lot of the leaders that I coach and work with are just slammed back to back. They're going from between multiple meetings all day. A lot of the time, any real work they have to do or checking their email, etc., happens at the end of the day, often at the expense of their family time, etc. So there's just no space to actually step back and think strategically and allow for things to just kind of incubate and percolate, and to just have the luxury to explore something without defining it, categorizing it, solutioning it. I think that kind of space is really important to actually say, what are the assumptions that we're holding around this? And how do we know whether it's true or not? How do we test whether these assumptions are true or not? And actually having some kind of ritual, whether that's once a week, you personally take that space and take that time, or whether you do that together as a team on some kind of cadence of reflecting on how your work has been, surfacing the assumptions that you're holding for going forward, and continuing to iterate on a regular basis. So I think those are some of the team rituals that actually can be really, really meaningful and supportive. I think at the end of the day, an individual or a leader's maturity and the ability to develop will be determined by so many different things that have to do with their own psychology. But I think a team's ability to operate with more agility, with the ability to actually question assumptions, test and learn, etc. I think a team can actually move a lot faster because it's a constellation of individuals coming together. And if you have the right rituals in place of reflection, of being strategic together, prioritizing together, I think you can go a long way with that.
Well said. Yeah, those are some awesome, very, I'd say, tangible ideas about how to help teams develop themselves, right, and operate in this way. Well, Usha, I'm curious to maybe we can end with this question. Yeah, what is it about this work, everything we've discussed, that drives you, that excites you, that like why are you passionate about this work?
Wow, that's a really thoughtful question. I mean, I've just moved back to the States, having been away for the last half a decade. And it's been an interesting time to be back. And I'm really sitting with this whole tariffs thing. And because that's top of mind for a lot of us, I think, right now. And I'm just really amazed at how much like these seemingly these decisions, I won't call them minute because they're actually really not, have such huge repercussions globally. You know, it's influencing so much across the world, across different economies. And it really reminds me how interconnected our world is and how much we actually need win-win solutions. And we need a cooperative way of moving forward will actually get us so much farther. And I just don't think we've fully caught up to that yet, you know? And so to me, if I can influence that at the organizational level, my hope is that that starts to ripple out across the board and across the world. And we actually start thinking in new ways that really support and harness the potential we have across and everywhere. And it's not just self-interest driving perverse outcomes, but actually shared and collective ownership and shared purpose that drives us to more high performing and human centric ways of life and a more life affirming way of life. So that's sort of my why. And I would love to hear yours as well.
That's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, when you look back at history, and then I think where we're in some cases, I know there's a lot of uncertainty. We can't predict the future as we've determined, but just based on the rough trajectory we're on now, it doesn't look great from my perspective. And I try to be an optimist as much as possible. And so just given this state we're in, I think it's just like the most important thing we can do as humans, as leaders, is to evolve ourselves, evolve this amazing complex thing we have up here, right? Our brain, the body's a big part of that too, arguably more so that we can ultimately just live meaningful lives, right? Where we feel connected to ourselves, to others, where there's less hate, less divisiveness, more compassion, more understanding, more love. I'm not talking about like a utopia necessarily, right? Conflict is good. Conflict is how we grow and develop. I kind of see a world where we're able to hold conflict and embrace conflict and embrace this nuance and complexity and uncertainty that we're talking about in order to just live more meaningful lives as a society. And like you said for yourself, and I believe in this too, it starts with, my opinion, with businesses, right? Businesses have an enormous amount of power in society, at least here in the West and particularly in America. And so developing leaders, developing employees to just live with this more expanded perspective, right, just really excites me and drives me. And I do think this is one of the many solutions we need to just move forward as a society and frankly as a species.
Thanks, Jared. I definitely agree. I feel like the urgency is pretty profound at the moment, and the impact that organizations have in this time, I think, is really profound as well. Thanks so much for having this conversation. I hope this is helpful for all of you out there listening. If you'd like some support in continuing to transform your own leadership or your teams, please reach out to us and we will support you the best we can. And anything else that you'd like to add, Jared?
No, really enjoyed this conversation, Usha. Thanks so much. And thanks for listening,
Likewise.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.